Hello, everyone. This is my second paper for the class. It's following up on a lot of the things that we talked about in my last presentation. This paper that I'm reviewing is called Communicative Efficiency and Differential Case Marking. All right, so last time we talked about differential marking. So one of the examples that people may be familiar with is Spanish, where you have this a that can show up. Pepe vio a su padre. So there's su padre, your father, his father, that is animate. But Pepe vio su coche. So if you're seeing a car is not animate, so it doesn't take the a. So that is what differential marking is. And I'm going to be using this term a lot through the paper. I'm just going to be abbreviating it DM. Okay, so differential marking is a surface structure. This is the structure from last week where you have the communicative goal underlying, you have surface structures in the language, and then you have information structure mediating. So differential marking is the surface structure, and one of the intermediary things here in Spanish specifically is animacy. It's different in different languages. And the question of this paper is, what is the underlying factor? What are the communicative goals behind all different kinds of differential marking? So one of the theories from Judith Eisen, the overt marking of a typical object facilitates comprehension where it is most needed and not elsewhere. So here you want people to understand what you're saying, but you also want to minimize the amount of words that you have to say. You don't want your sentences to just be incredibly long. So you need to balance those two things, and that balance is called efficiency. So that's one theory, is the efficiency theory. Okay, another theory is markedness. Markedness is saying, well, there's something that's being marked. It's literally being marked in the morphology with this marker, and that is actually representing iconically an underlying markedness too. So semantically, this must be marked in a similar way, and so they're kind of paralleling each other. So markedness is referring both to the morphology and also the semantics. There are actually lots of other motivations, and some of them I think are pretty important, but the good thing about having these two options is that's something that you can test. You can just pit them against each other. It's easy to quantify, and so that's what this paper is going to do. It's also drawing on this notion of cues. So there's two different kinds of ways of looking at cues, that is their availability and their reliability. And these are kind of looking at the same thing in reverse. So the cue availability says, if a grammatical structure is expressed, then this cue is available. And the cue reliability says, if the cue is available, then the grammatical or semantic function will be expressed. So which one is the case? Is the availability driving whether this differential marking surfaces, or is the grammatical and semantic function driving it? And so these can also be expressed with probability, and that's actually how we're going to operationalize this. So in this Spanish sentence, veo a, so here you have the a, you have the differential marker. What's more likely to get the differential marker? Well, Sophia is more likely to get it because Sophia is animate. A mapa, that's an item that's not animate. So you would express this as probability given differential marking of Sophia is greater than the probability given differential marking of El Mapa. And reliability, cue reliability, let's say you have this English sentence, blank went to the store. is she the more likely subject, or is it the more likely subject? Well, they're both available. But in this sentence, I found blank, you can only have it. You can't say I found she, right? Because of case marking in English or case inflection. So because of that, you would say, given the fact that you have she, let's say you assume that something already says she, is that likely to be a subject? It has to be a subject because it can't be an object. But if you have it could be a subject or an object. So the probability given she that the word is a subject is greater than the probability given it that the word is a subject. So those are cues. We also talked about motivation. And so how do these things fit together? So cue availability, that goes with the markedness theory. Cue reliability, that goes with the efficiency theory. So again, expressing this in probabilities, you would say for markedness, given a certain role, a subject or an object, given the certain role, what is the probability that a certain feature will arise or is indicated? So for instance, animacy. And okay, so this assumes that the unmarked thing is more common. Cue reliability is saying if you're seeing this feature like animacy, what is the probability that a certain role will happen? And that is assuming that features are efficient. There are problems with each of these. This is a bit of a spoiler. So the problem with markedness is you're actually going to come up with a lot of incorrect predictions, and that's a decrease in the accuracy here. But efficiency also has a problem. That's that it's over-generating predictions, which decreases the precision. All right, so let's get into some of these specific predictions here. And if you look at these are all essentially the exact same prediction, just looking at it from a different starting point. So if you're saying the fifth one here, A's are usually animate. And A, that's another way of talking about a subject, essentially. So if you're saying A's are usually animate, that is starting from the perspective that you have an A. Efficiency, you say animates are usually A's. That's starting from the perspective that you have something that's animate. So which one of these is the better prediction? All right, so this is a corpus study. It is looking at different languages, and in all of the languages, it is spoken, informal conversation that we're looking at. That seems to be the most relevant. And the languages are English, Russian, Lao, and Udi. And so these are all mostly from different language families. They're typologically very different. And what patterns can we see across this broad range of languages? All right, so when doing the experiment, you have to annotate all of these different languages, and you select different clauses. You saw on the last slide somewhere between 100 and 200 clauses usually for each of these languages. And you're wanting clauses that have exactly one subject and one object, or one A and one P. So that means you're looking for clauses that are going to be active, transitive, and have an A and P that are different things. And the selection was not quite random because you're looking for these clauses that fit these criteria. So they're kind of cherry-picked, but according to the criteria just above that you need for the experiment to work. And they are excluding sentences that have the same data as another sentence. So that's not going to weigh or skew the results. And they did, at least for some of the languages, they had multiple people annotate them, and they're only going with the sentences that had the same annotations between the different annotators. And that's because we're really not interested in the diversity within a single language. Obviously, you wouldn't want to exclude anything if you're actually trying to understand a specific language. But here we're trying to get a really good cross-linguistic sample, and you want the best cases. And they were annotating for lots of different features. So this middle column here, the different categories, that's what all the annotations were. So a noun was either lexical or non-lexical. A noun was either first, second, or third person, I guess specifically for pronouns. Nouns were either animate or inanimate, definite or indefinite, given or new. So they're collapsing a lot of these subcategories that, again, in a particular language, these subcategories are going to be relevant. But in this cross-linguistic study, you don't want to get into that much detail. But they still do have 5 different domains here, so you're going to get some good data out of this. All right, so here are their results. And I put the statistics slide a little later, so we'll get to that. But if you're just looking at how well these things predicted, so here we're looking at efficiency. So we're looking at how well A is predicted given certain features. And so if you look just at how close something is to 100%, some of these are actually not too great, but they are all clearly probable or improbable, like a 50% cutoff. And that is compared to here, this is the markedness theory, the probability given A of certain features. Actually, a lot of these are much closer to 100%. But the problem is, here you have the person, so first person or third person, that are all over the map. There's no cross-linguistic continuity here. And also for P's, again, this is still the markedness theory. If you look at the lexical, non-lexical at the left, again, they're around 50%, which is not good. And actually, the inanimate is the opposite of what the prediction was, so it's flipped. So there's some issues with both of these, but if you're just making a cutoff point and saying, well, is something above or below the cutoff, these are the specific predictions that failed. And if you notice, they're all on the markedness column. So here's all 4 of these put together, all 4 of the data plots, the efficiency on the top 2, markedness on the bottom, and then A on the left, P on the right. And so you can kind of see, again, the markedness for A looks really good, but actually if you look at the P one, it's not nearly as close. And so this was tested statistically. Okay, so the results, the conclusion in the paper, the quantitative analysis suggests that Q reliability, which is efficiency, outperforms Q availability or markedness in predicting the patterns of observed cross-linguistic that are observed cross-linguistically in differential case marking of A and P. And so now I'm going to talk about the statistical analysis. They used a mixed effect Poisson regression, which was statistical to a very high degree. I looked this up and I was getting a couple of different explanations from different sources about when to use the Poisson distribution, but this is just from Wikipedia. The probability of a given number of events occurring in a fixed interval of time or space, if these events occur with a known constant mean and independently of the time since the last event. So essentially here you have nouns that are occurring throughout a text or throughout a sample, corpus sample. And you're saying, well, it's a fixed interval. Every sentence is going to have nouns and they're going to be marked in some way, definite, given, whatever. But it's not necessarily interrelated. So just because this thing is marked definite here, who knows what the next noun is going to be marked. So it's constant, but the events themselves are independent. So I think that's why they chose this model. And this is actually the formula for the probability. So X here is the number of events. So maybe that's the number of times something is marked as animate. And then the mu there is just the mean. And I couldn't find specific information about doing this with mixed effects, but in general, mixed effects are just something where you have some that are fixed and some that are random. And I think that's probably fair given all of the different things that they were testing for, all of the different domains that they were annotating. And they did end up including random slopes and intercepts to increase the reliability of the model. All right, so going back to the data that we looked at a minute ago, I have a few criticisms. So efficiency is definitely more accurate. As we saw, all of the predictions came true, but it is less precise. Markedness actually ended up being more precise in a lot of cases. So I don't know that you can say efficiency is definitely the right way to talk about this. It just outperformed it given the criteria that they set. And yeah, they both seem relevant. And really, like I said, this is only a binary. There's lots of other explanations that need to be looked at and probably have a big effect as well. And my other big criticism of this paper, I was attracted to the paper because in the abstract, in the title, it's talking about differential marking. And that's where you have a marker on a subject or an object, like we saw in the Spanish example. But at the end of the day, they didn't test for that. What they ended up testing for was if these features occur on nouns, and those nouns could be differentially marked or they could be unmarked. So they do make a couple of statements in the conclusion. They say, well, languages with differential marking tend to do this in correspondence to these features. If the cues are reliable and lead to correct expectations, you can do these different things with the case marker. If they lead to wrong expectations, the listener may need an extra cue, such as the case marker. So they do tie it in at the end, but the experiment itself had nothing to do with differential marking. So I was very disappointed in the paper in that regard. But overall, it was still a really interesting study. I'm hoping in my own work in the future to try to look at some of those other explanations, other cognitive or historical reasons why case marking arises, and how it relates to other factors of information structure. But this paper was a really good place to start. I hope you learned something and give me a comment in the discussion. Thank you so much.